Okay, I'm going to invite our panelists up to the front. Make your way up to the theater. Davey is the father to 2 young children, so he knows firsthand about family cycling.
Yeah, I've been riding with my children for 8 years now.
8 years.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk to Davey here. We have Ben. Ben, what is your last name?
Joillet.
Joillet. Ben Joillet, and you live in San Francisco.
I do.
And can you tell me a little bit about your background generally, and then your background in family cycling?
Yeah, so I guess generally, let me start with cycling. So like I've been a cyclist for 13 years out of necessity, family cyclist for the last 3, an electric bike owner for the last 3 years. So and family cycling is my main way of getting around. So I'm very passionate about it, which is why I'm happy to be here.
So Ben, that's why Ben is on the panel.
And I'm a customer at New Whale who's awesome. So I'm happy to be supporting you guys here.
Well, thank you, Ben, for coming. Passion gets you onto the panel. Next, we have Liz Canning. Liz, you live in Fairfax, correct?
Yep.
Liz is also a family cyclist, and she is a filmmaker who is you're submitting the film, I hear.
Yeah, end of the month.
End of the month.
Pretty much done.
She's submitting her film called Motherload to which film festivals?
The Toronto International.
Toronto International Film Festival.
Yeah.
So she's been working on this film about the cargo bike movement for a little while, and we are finally
very generous of you, thank you.
And we're almost there, and so we're going to hear about both the film, hopefully, and your experience family cycling.
Sure.
And then finally we have Dory Apollonio. Dory is a friend of the New Wheel as well, and you may also know her from her family cycling blog called Hum of the City. Which was a blog started to sort of document living car-free in San Francisco, in a way, right?
We started writing it when we got our first family bike. Yeah.
So it started, and was
2011.
And was it started as a sort of advocacy, or was it started just sort of
it was just sort of
journaling?
It was a record of what we were doing, and at the time, in 2011, there wasn't really a lot written on different types of family bikes. There were a couple of blogs, but not many. And it was frustrating to me to not be able to find information on people's experiences with family biking and what bikes they use. So I ended up writing my own.
And Dory also has 2 cargo bikes.
Yeah, 3.
Three cargo bikes. So she's going to talk about her experience cycling in San Francisco, and yeah. Thank you for being on the panels. Thank you, all panelists. Oh, and we have...
Should I be on the panel?
Yeah, why not? As long as the baby's been fed, you can be on the panel.
She's gone.
And we have Karin Wiener here at the end. Last but not least. Karin is the co-owner of the New Wheel with myself, and she is a family cyclist. Officially now.
New family cyclist.
New family cyclist. So she's going to talk about...
I'm the newbie on the block here. I'm the person who doesn't know what they're doing.
We're here to answer your question.
Oh, yeah, sure.
She's been living vicariously through a lot of family cyclists for a long time, and she figured, you know what? I need to change this. I want to do this. And so now she has a cargo bike from Reese and Muller and is going to talk about her experience too. And I'll be the moderator. So without further ado, maybe we'll talk to Ben first. Ben, maybe you can answer the question, how did you hear about family cycling? How did it start for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So initially, I just needed a way to get around. This started when I was in Chicago, and we didn't have a car, and I can't. So at first, it kind of started with just a trailer, which works, but there's a lot better options out there, and I slowly realized that after seeing other people riding around with a cargo bike. And my first introduction, I bought I think it was the original Extra Cycle Radish, used off eBay because it's like the only thing I could afford at the time. But it really changed my perspective on getting around with a family because it got so much easier. I could lock things up in one kind of consecutive space. I could put a bunch of stuff on there. And even with recent addition of my daughter, I have 2 kids, and just how to get her around and fitting everyone on there and picking up the groceries and doing everything really just with a bicycle because I absolutely love riding a bike. And thankfully my kids do too, which is nice. I was terrified about that for a while. But no, I mean, and last year buying an electric bike really changed that for me because of just the amount of load I can carry, the distance I could go. I mean, I live in San Francisco and even considered riding my bike up here. It's really such an enjoyable way to get around, and it's super convenient too, especially with. I work in Embarcadero, so just getting there by a car, unless you take public transit, it's really difficult. So biking there's really open up a lot of just opportunities for me to get around and go places that I normally wouldn't be able to do.
Maybe we'll go to Davey. Davey, what got you into this field?
Yeah, to some
and
extent.
Lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. Similarly, I have had a long-term commitment to cycling. I grew up in a really car-dominated place, but never learned to drive. And so for me, a lot of my choices around family biking just come from my commitment to using a bike, to not driving. I come for the car hate, but I've stayed with the bikes. But I'm not in my own shop. This isn't being recorded, right?
Oh yeah.
That's cool.
No, this is on.
All right, this isn't. No one else can hear that. I hate cars. But I mean, there's a lot. I have a lot of backstory there. But really, what it comes down to is, I had always assumed that my choice to not drive was a result. My ability to make that choice was a result of certain societal privileges that I've been granted. And I'd assumed that by the time I stepped from a bohemian phase of my life and started a family, that I would need to get a driver's license. That's what everybody told me. Even the other car-free people that I knew basically told me that. And then I was really lucky that I was getting ready to make those kinds of changes in my life in the early 2009, 2010 period, when a lot of really smart role models, folks, were spending a lot of time on the internet sharing their experiences as like trailblazers in family biking. People like Liz and Dory specifically Liz and Dory, not people like them. And some other people locally in Seattle, Morgan Shearer, who's been a real champion for cargo bikes for a long time, were role models. Thank you so much. To me and people like me, to the possibility that with the right tools and with the support of a community around you, you could make this lifestyle choice work. Yeah, water break. Thanks.
That was amazing multitasking.
Yeah, thank you for doing that. Yeah, and so that's basically it. And then I built my own cargo bikes for a long time, and I got started on an extra cycle free radical conversion, and I was working in bike advocacy and education at that point in my life, and had the idea to make a transition from there to dedicating my whole life to helping people, especially moms, ride bicycles more.
So we mentioned, Davey mentioned Dory's being sort of a thought leader in this. Before Dory, there wasn't much written about it, I guess, in a way. So who did?
It was Totcycle.
Yeah, Totcycle. Yeah, and then family ride and car-free days.
How did you get inspired to do what you did and then write about it?
So probably the writing about it part comes a little bit from, like mentioned, Totcycle and Family Ride, who have been around even longer, and they were both bikers before. Matt and I were not really bikers. We were people who moved around a lot, and so we mostly relied on public transit and walking. And when we had kids, we got a car, because that's what you did. And what the real change for us actually was when I'm a professor of public health. I had a business trip that I went to Copenhagen, and while we were in Copenhagen with the kids, we ended up renting bikes. And, for those of you who don't know much about family biking, Copenhagen is kind of like the pinnacle of family biking. So when we went in to rent bikes, because that was how everyone got around in Copenhagen, they gave us bikes with car seats on them for the kids. And we ended up riding all around Copenhagen with our kids on the back, and they thought it was awesome, and we thought it was awesome. And when we came back to San Francisco, we're like, this is how we want to get around. And so we were not do-it-yourselfers. We ended up buying the first cargo bike we bought was actually not a cargo bike at all. It was a breezer, and we put a car seat on it. And then when that was insufficient, we moved up to a midtail, which has a deck on the back for kids. But when we really started to ride with one person with two kids, we got our real cargo bikes that we still have.
I think that's an interesting point, which is, and we tell people, cargo bike or a family bike doesn't necessarily mean it has to be, it's not one thing. Mm-hmm. It just means that it works particularly well for children. Liz, maybe you can speak, because you've had many different cargo bikes. It seems like a lot of people here have, started with one thing and moved to other things. What have you seen in all of your talking to lots of people about that evolution? And what has been your experience?
So in my experience, I was a pretty hardcore cyclist by the time I had twins in 2008. We live on a hill that's like half a mile long with a 22% grade at one point. And I did my best with a trailer, which my kids hated. And every time I went up that 22% pitch, I thought I'm going to fall over and we're going to slide down the hill. And but it really was important to me as a mom, especially maybe for me, it felt like, especially with twins, that I have this time where they're on a bike and I'm riding, and it's like me time, but it's also I'm caring for them, and I didn't want to give that up, but for a while I was driving, and I was like Davey, I did not drive. Like my whole life, I never wanted anything to do with cars. I did not drive until I was forced. And then I literally Googled cargo bike, and I discovered people like Dory and people like Sarah Armstrong, Full Hands. That was a big thing because she had twins, and she was riding on a cargo bike. And I discovered this thing called electric assist. And the first bike we got was really awesome, the Shuttlebug, which they don't make anymore. It was a very light Bachfiets, and we put a motor on it. At first I got it without the motor, and I struggled. And then we got the motor, and then I thought, between what I had seen online with the level of just like evangelism, as far as once people start this, they just go crazy about it, and they want to tell everybody, and they want to make videos, and between that and my experience as a cyclist with an electric motor, I thought, this is not just for cyclists anymore, this is for anybody. And so I wanted to make a film, and I'm not really answering your question, but
no, it doesn't matter.
Okay, so we had the Shuttlebug for a while, and then your kids start to have friends, and how was I going to get more than 2 kids up my hill? So we got a Bullet. We sold the Shuttlebug. We got the Bullet, and we put a huge box on it. And for a while, I could carry 4 kids in the Bullet all over Fairfax and San Anselmo, and that was pretty awesome and fun and hilarious. And now, this is my son right here. He rode his own bike here. Woo!
Yeah.
Anyway, then we got the motor on the Bullet was Bionics, and the motors are improving at a really fast pace, and the Bosch and a mid-drive is what I needed at that point. I could not pedal 2 kids up the hill with the Bionics anymore. So we got the Edge Runner with the Bosch motor, and I love it.
A great bike.
Yeah. And it's sort of infantilizing to put like a 9 or 10-year-old in a box. It is, they feel a little bit cooler.
Yeah, they have to be
on the
over
back.
30 probably. Then it's okay.
Anyway.
That is just date night.
Then it's date night. So I guess I haven't asked Karin anything.
I got a cargo bike because it was kind of part of the job, and I was about to have a baby.
So it's just at this stage, now it's come along all this history, and now we're at the culmination of it in 2017, and it's just like, duh, you get a cargo bike.
Okay,
Well-
that's a parent of a new child, of a new child, right? My child is the culmination of history.
Yeah.
But but as the like mom side of the parent who has the new parent thing, there's a lot of changes that are happening. And honestly, I wasn't 100% sure. Like as a really pregnant person, you're not able to ride as much as you were normally riding. You're finding walking and taking the bus and finding other ways to get around. And I wasn't 100% sure that I was gonna like be able to pull it off with a 1-month-old or with instead of a car, basically. But we don't have a car. So we bought the bike. It was there the week before Ida was here, and then Ida was born, and all of a sudden you have like a bunch of new things to figure out, and you're all torn up because you just like had a baby. And after I think it was 5 weeks, we decided to take the bike out and see how it was gonna go. It was a little nerve-wracking, and I have to say, like, you could not pay me to be a mother without a cargo bike. It actually turns out that it's like completely 100% necessary, I think, to be a good, sane parent, to have a cargo bike. It is the most liberating thing I can possibly imagine, and I'm so excited. And it's actually given me a really, really new perspective on doing my job, which is selling electric bikes, because it's a lot more meaningful for me now that I'm not just like lugging myself around in what feels to be like sort of a personal choice. It's more than a personal choice at this point, and it's going really well, and it's not scary. And I think that is the culmination of many years of infrastructure improvements, of cultural attitude improvements around the city, people not being bad, mean people in their cars and in other bikes and on the streets generally. They're really generous with the space to these new young people who are joining the city and are out in lower lower consumption, energy efficient modes of transport.
Less cars, more humanity.
Anyways, I'm so blown away by how good it's been.
Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, Liz, you mentioned that there's like a lot of passion in family cycling. And it's not just family cycling, obviously. I mean, there's a lot of passion in all electric, and there's a lot of passion in cycling, but we're biased, obviously, here. We see a lot of passion in electric cycling. But why do you think, what is it about family cycling? I mean, this is for the whole panel. What is it about family cycling that gets people so revved up?
Well, I think firstly it's, what Karin referred to, that there's so much drudgery involved in parenting. I mean, it's unbelievable, the amount of labor, the amount of just like errand running, and that is the worst part. I couldn't get over it. It was a shock to me. Like, nobody prepared me for how much just crap there is you have to do. And when you can turn that errand running into an adventure on your bike, it is transformational. I mean, and then secondly, I think you are experiencing it a bit through your children. And your children love it. My kids hated the trailer. They were sort of like luggage, behind that I was dragged behind my bike. But on our bike, where we had a box in the front, we're going down our super steep hill super fast. They'd be like, ah! They just loved it, and I think it brings back the freedom you felt as a kid on your bike. I think, and you also, it changes the way you interact with your community. I mean, people, when they see you with your kids on a bike, they smile and wave and give you the thumbs up, and it feels great. Yeah?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
So I wanted to add something to that. And I think the biggest thing that I think is shocking to me is that there's so many obstacles in the way of why a cargo bike riding with your kids is a bad thing. And, how difficult it will be, how, have to, the mode of transportation, are they going to be safe? Is it going to be fun? Like, it sounds like a lot of work. But everyone who ever gets into it and starts doing it, they quickly realize how much, like, all of those things are still there, but they matter so much less than how much fun it actually is to do. And it's really like a way of, not to step too high on the pedestal, but like a societal sort of like, it's a better way of getting around than cars. I mean, we have a car. It's not like we don't, cars are evil, but I mean, if more people rode bikes as a family, especially, like just the safer roads are going to be, the more fun you're going to have, the more exercise you're going to be, and I feel like people know that, but there's a lot of things in the way, and I feel like once you get started and get into it, you realize how little those things matter.
There's a mental barrier, maybe.
Yeah.
What's interesting too about all those things, the list of problems that you just listed, what has struck me so distinctly is that when I do choose to use a car, because sometimes one does need to use a car, and I load my daughter up into it and we go do it, all those problems that people project onto bicycles, they're actually living with all those problems in their car already all the time. It's just that we're in a culturally normative space for those problems. Yeah. And then when you get on a bicycle, all of a sudden you're engaging with those problems much more actively and much more creatively than you do when you're in a car. Which in a car, you just surround yourself with a bunch of like extra security features that weigh a lot and contribute to the, the wind has arrived. You combat it with weight, basically. Like you're a bigger... parents have said to me, I had to get an SUV because, it's basically an arms race. Like, you have to be in the heavier car if you're going to get in the accident, right? Well, on a bicycle, your plan is just, I'm not going to get in an accident. And when you're on an e-bike, you're like, I'm going to take a route that's going to keep me and my kids safe, and we're going to go have fun and be in the world in a positive way, not in the, I want to drive the bigger machine gun sort of way.
Yeah, we're going to de-escalate.
Let's just de-escalate.
I could add, I don't think it's always conscious, but I think as a parent, your perspective on climate change changes a bit. It's a bit more intense. And at the same time, your level of consumption goes way up. And I think riding a cargo bike feels good for that reason, too.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So we touched on the topic of safety, and that's something, that it's for new cargo bike riders or new family cyclists. It's obviously that everyone is scared of killing the kid, to put it lightly. It's just like, SIDS and all this stuff. When you're getting, it's crazy. So what's the lived experience of safety on a cargo bike? Like, what's the real down low, would you say?
Dory.
Everyone's looking at me because I am the worst case scenario. I did get run over in Golden Gate Park on a supposedly car-free day, which it wasn't, while riding a bike with my son, who's in the audience. And I was disabled for about 6 months because my leg was crushed. The car ran over it. So, and yet, here we are. I'm on a family biking panel. It didn't put me off. My son was actually much better off than I was. He was thrown off the bike and scraped up, but not permanently hurt. So, short of death, I think, this is about as bad as it gets, is to get run over and disabled on a car-free, supposedly, day in Golden Gate Park. But that experience, I had a lot of time to think about it because I wasn't going anywhere or doing anything while I was essentially in traction. And what it really brought home to me, because I had a lot of time to think, is like, the problem isn't the bicycle. The problem is cars. Like, when I was pregnant with my son, I was rear-ended while driving, and I had, ended up on bed rest and I was like, the commonality through this is being hit by cars. And so, you can play this game where you get sort of the bigger vehicle, but, unlike some of the people on this panel, I actually tried driving with my kids when they were little. When we didn't know about cargo bikes, and as far as I can tell, no one was really using them except for people in other countries. And it was just really unpleasant. My kid, like you talked about a trailer being like luggage. A kid in a car is like luggage. They throw up in the back, and you're stuck in traffic, and so they're covered with their own vomit, and there's nothing that you can do. You're just sort of stuck, waiting to get to a situation where you can make it better. And I hated that feeling of helplessness. I always felt helpless in a car because I was surrounded by all of these vehicles that were threatening me. And so the change that I made, I do admittedly use more transit. Part of that is because my kids are getting older, but mostly the only change I've made is to spend more time on sort of paths rather than roads, and just sort of minimize the time I spend being around cars, because getting in a car doesn't take me away from the threat. It puts me right in the middle of it. Being on the bicycle takes me away from the threat more than pretty much anything else I can do.
Are there, I mean, there's also policy, right? Like, how do we engage with policy?
Yeah, we've had an amazing experience in Seattle with regards to that. Because when we opened our shop, I'm not going to say that G&O is responsible for a profound sea change in bicycle politics in Seattle, but it is. And it's because when we opened our shop like 5 years ago, our advocacy community, like it is in most places in the United States, was very dominated by recreational cyclists, very dominated by white folks who were single-family homeowners, who were bicycling for recreation, were bicycling, and were relatively wealthy. That's still largely the case, and very, very male and straight dominated as well. I forgot to mention that. And but one of the things that I've seen as the family biking movement has grown in my town is that there are more and more people out there who are regular old folks, a lot of them women, a lot of them parents of young children, who are having experiences on the road as family cyclists where the same thing that happens to a new bike commuter in general in any city, right? That level of indignity every time you see somebody driving wrong or you realize that intersection is designed wrong. We're super citizens in a lot of ways. And what we've seen in Seattle is the participation of so many more women and so many more families and so many more people showing up at the council chambers with babies in their arms. And frankly, we're better advocates. Our lived experiences, what we're doing on our bicycles is a lot more easy to relate to for people who aren't choosing to bicycle for recreation. The accusation that bicycling is only an elite activity, while a lot of us are riding on bicycles that are fairly expensive, so there are barriers still for a lot of people. It doesn't change the fact that our activity, ferrying our children, is a relatable one. And so I think that we're a good secret weapon for advocacy organizations for sure. And I think that our perception, because we're those kinds of super citizens, I think is valuable to listen to. That this might feel safe to you, other bicyclist or bicycle advocacy professional or traffic designer, but I'm saying that it doesn't feel safe to me. I have 3 children with me, and that feedback is valuable and should be taken seriously.
When I first started riding with Ida, I was like, oh my God, you know what I really want to do? I want to get like the head of every bicycle advocacy group in California onto my cargo bike with my infant in the front and have them ride their best route. Because their perspective on their best route is going to really change.
Yeah. And all the other parts about infrastructural design as well, not just some baseline, this is probably very safe, all the questions about convenience too.
Yeah.
Because of all the schlepping, all the extra crap that comes along with our lifestyle, are very relatable, normal human lifestyle as parents. That's a pain point for people, and that's a barrier to cycling.
So my film has been going on for so long. It's had many different names. The reason we settled on Motherload was I interviewed 2 people, Jonathan Mouse and Ethan Joillet, who referred to women with kids as the canary in the coal mine or the indicator species, in that when you see a mom with her kids, you're going to tend to think she thinks it's safe. I wonder, it probably is. And they're sort of have a mainstreaming effect. So I think having moms and kids on bikes, regardless of the risk we take sometimes is a really great thing.
It's been somewhat remarkable for us to see just how popular family cycling is. And it's kind of beyond what we at the first thought it would be. I mean, you would think.
Told you.
Yeah, well, you would think that it would be, commuters, the low-hanging fruit are the commuters who, have a 5-mile commute and there's gonna, they can replace, they'd either take transit and it's gonna be faster on an e-bike, but the reality is when I go out and ride, the people I see the most out on the street, putting the most miles on their bikes are beyond the long-distance cycling commuters, it's families.
Yeah.
And that's been remarkable.
Yeah.
Well, if you think about, as a mom going to get some exercise, for example, you've got your gym membership, whatever, it's $30 a month or whatever, but then suddenly you've got another human that you have to take care of while you're getting exercise for an hour, for 45 minutes or whatever, and that's going to cost you whatever babysitter costs you, and then you think you'd really like to do that more than once a week, ideally, right? And all of a sudden, the only thing to do is to go bicycling with your kid,
Yeah.
because nothing else really makes sense. And you need a release. Like, you need a moment in your life that is physical, other than like holding the baby that is wiggling out of your arm and pulling your rotator cuff out of its place, right? It's really, really important.
Yeah. I'm a professor of public health, and because faculty have this problem of like trying to work too much, and I went to this seminar when I was when I had my first kid, held by other more senior women about sort of what they'd done with their lives. And so they're like, the number one thing that you have to do is kill your commute, because time that you spend in a car is not time spent working, and it's not time spent with your family. It is wasted time. It's useless. And so when we started riding our bikes, like suddenly it became not wasted time. Like at least I was getting exercise and spending time with my kids, where I wasn't before. And so I would go like to meetings with people, and they'd say, "Oh, like when was the last time you exercised?" I'm like, "Well, I rode my bike here." They're like, "Oh, I haven't been to the gym in 6 months." Yeah, it is the only way. Yeah. That you can make like time because you have limited time. Like when you have kids, like suddenly you have all of these responsibilities, and like all the things you had that you called free time before just like vaporize. And so like it's only by like multitasking in a way, like putting up bicycle commuting with your kids, that you're both getting exercise and getting the places that you need to be.
Yeah. So I read recently, this is terrifying, that Americans spend 95% of our time inside, and that kids spend half as much time outside as they did 20 years ago. Now, this is obviously going to affect our relationship to nature, the thing that we really need to be invested in, and we need our children to really be invested in. So that's become a theme in my film then, is that, getting your kids around on a bike is going to fundamentally change their relationship to their environment, to the elements, to, their community.
Yeah, so adding on that, like one of the big proponents of me being a family cyclist is I love cycling, and I wanted to share that with my kids. And my son, who's watching Netflix over there and not listening, but it gives them introduced out to like cycling, and it's not weird for them to be on a bike commuting for 30 minutes plus, and it's not like they're not scared to be on the road with other cars, and it's very normal for them. Like being in a car, actually. He doesn't like it. He gets like car sick, and it's so interesting because when we go other places and we'll go travel and see family, and it's like, well, how are we getting there? It's like a car. It's like, well, can we walk? It's like, no, it's too far. What about a bike? Well, we don't have it here. So it really like that's the biggest thing for me, is introducing the kids into like this is their new normal, and when obstacles come in the future, like, oh, well, you can't do this or X or Y. It's like, yeah, I can. I did it with my dad the whole time I was growing up. So that's the big thing it is for me.
Yeah, and I hope that family biking is completely mainstreamed and it's just one aspect of every single American's life, like we live in Copenhagen someday. But it is also extremely valuable, I think, to role model subversive choices or, transgressive choices or non-traditional choices for your kids. And to say, like, if you want to dress if you want to dress in some way that people want to ridicule you for, who cares what they think, like Richard Feynman said. And I just feel that way about parenting. My daughter and I pull up to middle school, and we have this struggle right now where do we turn the music down the block before we get to school? So there's some hint of being embarrassed about being ferried places and about the big scene that we cause everywhere we go. And I'm very interested in how it goes, but I do feel like, at least in my family and the way that I'm trying to raise my kids, if they end up driving, that's great. If they end up becoming investment bankers, that's okay, I guess. But as long as there is some way in which they know that it is worthwhile to challenge the status quo, to question why things are done the way they are, and to find ways to change it for yourself, for the sake of your own joy, or for the sake of your community, I think that's worthwhile. And I feel like that's true for all bike commuters. That's one of the things that makes bike commuters some of the coolest people. And it's extremely true when it comes to family bikers, because we're a whole group of people who are all trying to do it together. And just like all bike commuters, we know, like you said, that a lot of the things that look like barriers are actually not really there, or they're already shared by everybody. And the benefits are enormous. I park on the sidewalk. It's incredible. I park at the swing set.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah, no, it's the same thing, right? When I was injured, like I was walking with a cane and riding my bike for about 6 months. And I did that because, like, when I had an assisted bike, I'd ride right up to the door and unfold my cane and walk in. It minimized the time that I had to be, like, on the cane.
Yeah.
I had broken my, like, I think it was my toe or something,
Yeah.
and instead of walking, I would bike because it was
Yeah.
easier because I could get closer.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Interesting.
So I'm curious. Some of you have older children now, and we touched upon family cycling. I think sometimes in the public mind, or even in the brand's eye, or even in the retail shop's eye, family cycling means the long tail or the long front end or the but family cycling is a continuum. How does that? I've heard from customers that the continuum is one of the more challenging parts of family cycling. It's easier when they're younger, and then you get to a certain age, and because of our lackluster infrastructure, it's like now we have to make another set of choices about what we're doing. What has been the panel's experience with this?
Because of our hill, I would say, my kids have been on my bike longer than they would be in Fairfax. Fairfax, it's a pretty nice commute to the school. It's not hard, and a fair number of kids do ride and eventually ride on their own. It's been frustrating to me how badly my little girl, in particular, does not want to ride her own bike to school. Rocco is awesome.
You win, Rocco.
He is riding like crazy to and from school on his own now. Stormy wants to go on my bike, but hey, she's not begging to go in the car, so that's cool.
I heard an interesting thing from another panelist yesterday who's been riding with her kids. Claire has been riding with her kids for 3 years since the Edge Runner was first released. And her son is now 9 and just started riding his own bike. And she said that because he's been riding with her for so long, his sense of traffic and how to manage himself in that context is like completely intact. So he's 9 years old, and she trusts him to ride himself anywhere, with her anywhere in the city. And I hadn't really put that together, but I was really, really happy and excited to hear it. And right now, her biggest challenge is the hill. Because they live on the top of a very steep hill. And so, he rides with her where they're going, and then on the way back, they either have to walk together up the hill, or she gets his bike onto her bike, and they lug it up the hill. So anyways, that becomes the complexity.
So when are you guys going to start selling electric bikes for 9-year-olds?
So what does the panel think about that?
That's the big question.
Yeah. My oldest is 12 now. And he's still capable of riding on our bikes, but there's definitely, as Davey pointed out, a cool factor to it that's becoming an issue. But we didn't come to this as like people who were like super into biking. Like we were just people who didn't drive much, and so I don't have a problem that he takes the bus to school when he wants to. That's cool. And maybe he'll come back to cycling, and maybe he won't. They both still like riding in the box, which surprises me because talk about uncool. But it's covered. So,
I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
It seems.
I like riding in the box.
Yeah, I like riding in the box.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like the in Europe you're starting to see electric bikes for kids. And you're starting to see them show up here, but it seems like maybe an investment. I mean, there's still the same level of quality, and the investment in that might be a little bit of a trip for people, especially when it's they're going to outgrow it pretty soon. And we've had actually good experience selling people adult bikes, like folding bikes.
Yeah. So that's kind of where we are. Like the hills are a huge issue. We live in San Francisco, and I'm just kind of like my son was riding our Brompton for a while. There's an assisted Brompton coming out. Like, that's good for kids from about 9 to forever. Yeah. And that may be the solution that, we're really waiting for.
I think that passengering large people on any bicycle that's been developed so far is a challenging proposition for a lot of complicated reasons. But I think that one of the things that I'm hearing emerge here and that I want to say is that I think that these decisions will disperse a little bit. That they won't be as focused on specific technology, and it'll be more about our individual lifestyles and the places that we live and our kids' needs. And I think that's if you think about it, parenting is a metaphor for that. Your child is like one thing, and then they differentiate and they individuate. And things become more and more specific for you and the way that you do things. I think as long as I'm very concerned about setting up my children to be bicycling couch potatoes. That that it's so much easier for me to haul them at this point in their life than it is to encourage them to practice their traffic handling skills. And
That's an interesting problem.
That gets me a little bit worried, because again, I'm not going to get it. I don't care if they don't want to be seen with me. I'm not getting a driver's license, so like this is going to have to work. Or they're going to have to ride on their own, but then they're not always going to have their own bicycle at their destination. So you know, it's going to be a combination of my lifestyle choices, the policy, and municipal changes that we can make, and then, yeah.
I think the complexity reflects on our infrastructure problems, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, there's two things that come up when I think about having an 8 or 9-year-old on their own e-bike. One is obviously infrastructure safety, but the other is theft.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I maintain that, like, until the infrastructure overall, meaning bike shop service, road infrastructure, and theft is as good for my mom and for my 6-year-old as it is for me, we're sucking at what we do.
Well, I mean,
as a society. So I mean, I think we just need to do a lot better. In Denmark, so I'm Danish, and I come from a place where there are lots of 80-year-olds bicycling, and there are lots of 5-year-olds, honestly, bicycling their own bikes where they need to go. And it's a different culture. And it's totally attainable because they've done it, and they only started doing it in the 70s. So I am fully confident that we can do it, and I think it's kind of like an interesting challenge for me as a part of this community and this place to try to make it a lot better by the time Ida is in that position. I think that there's a curve that we can match. I hope.
So there was a point I wanted to bring up before about safety, and this is a good probably segue. So one of the biggest things that I think about when riding, I think this is brought up before, is it's not cyclists that are the danger, it's cars, and thinking about like what's the safest route to take my kids in, and sort of the arms race of like getting an SUV. There's a significant stretch on my way into the city that is on just a dedicated, like a bike path through Golden Gate Park, and there's no cars. That is significantly safer than riding in a car anywhere, because you're not going to get hit by another car. You're going to hit by another cyclist, but the odds of getting injured as much as you would in a high-speed collision with a car is almost negligible. So I think the big thing is infrastructure and getting more places where we can ride bicycles for kids, for families, for anyone, where they're unobstructed by other cars or the risk of getting hit by another car.
So I think at this point we should maybe open it up to questions from the audience. If there are any questions, does anyone have any thoughts or questions for the panel about cycling? Observations?
About bedtime practices, potty training.
Oh, I have questions for you.
Oh yeah, we got it. You're doing it wrong. Oh, that brings up a point. This is totally apropos of nothing. But there's one thing that I've been thinking about this community of family bikers as a movement and as a community that I really like highlighting, and I just like to brag about it. Bicyclists, kind of especially like hippie and transportation bicyclists, but bicyclists in general, can often be a community where people are really attached to their individual approach, and where they can be, unfortunately, a little bit prone to tell someone else, who otherwise is their friend or ally, that they're doing it wrong, right? Parents, again, especially kind of conscious parents and hippie parents and people who read every ingredient and who manage screen time and all that stuff, same deal. They might have a lot of really good ideas, baby wearing or breastfeeding exclusively and all this stuff, could all be really good ideas, but that can often lead to a cultural thing where people are shamed for not doing it exactly the same way, right? There's a lot of, you're doing it wrong. I don't know why the Venn diagram doesn't work at all when it comes to family bikers. I see the community of family bikers look to people and say, oh, I think I see why you're trying to do it that way. I wouldn't necessarily do it exactly the same way, but, you know, tell me more. Like, I see so much more patience and like kind role, I hope you see it too, and like kind role modeling from family bikers than I see in any other part of bicycling and any other kind of parenting. And I think that comes to some extent from the tone that's set by some of our earliest public folks. But I just think it's delightful, and I think that's, like, if I could say anything to anybody who was thinking about getting started with this, it's find a mom that you think you can trust and just spend a lot of time with her, and to trust each other, because people are so invested in each other's success in this. And I just think it's beautiful.
Along those same lines, I spent a lot of time in the 5 weeks between Ida being born and getting on a bike, thinking about my comebacks for people who were like mean to me, like car drivers and pedestrians who were mean to me because I was worried that people would judge me for having such a small child on my bike. And I haven't had to use any of my comebacks. In fact, people who I really didn't think would be the group of people to approach me are approaching me. They are not parents. Like, the parents are clearly seeing me, they're watching me, but they're not coming up to me. The people who are coming up to me are people who are like in their 80s, and they are so excited and kind and optimistic about what I'm doing, and it's a mind blower. It's so cool. So anyways, that's been, what goes around comes around. Either when you're blogging or when you're in just a space of ideas and of actions that are generous and optimistic and feel good.
If you want to use those retorts that you saved up, we could use you on Twitter. Because that still happens on Twitter, unfortunately.
Yeah, I don't go to Twitter.
Joel and Barb from Splendid Cycles, when I interviewed them, they said, yeah, bikes are an awesome social filter, but cargo bikes are like the best. They never meet anyone who's doing the cargo bike thing that they don't like.
Yeah. It's amazing. Our customers are amazing people.
Yeah.
I'm curious on the topic of the community and those you relate with. How has your experience been with your friends and family especially friends or other moms or other dads, about, I guess, both you being a model for them, that if they weren't into it already, and then also are you seeing people say, this is a really good idea, I'm going to do this too because of my friend Davey or my friend Ben who's doing this?
So I made a trailer for my film early on in 2011, and I have to say that a lot of people have told me they got the cargo bike after they saw the trailer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, and that's an amazing feeling. It's like Davey, Joseph Breali says in the film, he's was a bike shop owner in LA and sold cargo bikes. He says, when I get to know that somebody's going to have that feeling of like their little kids singing to themselves on a quiet street, and they can feel the wind on their face, and he says that's just a really important, big animal, human thing to have.
Yeah.
And he lives for knowing someone else is going to have that feeling.
Yeah.
Cool. But yes, both personally and many more emails than I could ever respond to, people do, yes. Take the example and run with it.
Awesome. Thanks for the work that you guys do.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think, do we have any questions from the panel on family biking? We have one.
So what do you guys think about the IM traffic, the traffic education? What kind of education do you condone for new parents kind of to learn how, to even know, like where I live, they paint bike lanes like this wide with, they mask out the stencil that's this big, it's supposed to be in there.
Yeah.
How do you teach people about infrastructure and making the lane?
Yeah, I think that for the most part, people are pretty well prepared for the best piece of advice you could give them, which is to take baby steps. When you have your child with you doing a new activity, it's kind of like telling a blind person to be careful. It's sort of like don't worry, I'm not going, like the worst situation is that infrastructure totally screwed you. That you were led to a place where you thought there would be end-to-end support and there wasn't. And then you should take to the sidewalk even if the law says you shouldn't. Honestly. But I think that the best training, like I said, I think I kind of already said this, I think the best training is the role modeling of other parents of small children, especially moms. And that, just like all bike commuters, though, you ask someone, hey, what's the best route from here to here? And they describe some crazy wiggle that goes behind that one dumpster and then cuts through that park. That so far, at least, that's very social. And it's passed on socially. And I think that's good-ish, except it's very niche. You need to already have a friend, so there's a pretty big barrier there. Some people don't have friends because they have babies.
I would recommend. I'm there. So there's this thing called Critical Mass, which is like a family biking monthly ride. Yeah, and I mean, if you live near one, to go on a ride like that, to connect through Facebook or whatever. If you do a few searches, you'll find there's so many groups of parents, and you may be able to find parents doing it in your community, because that's invaluable. To go ride with somebody who's been doing it is the best way. Yeah.
I was going to add something to that. My big thing is like coming from as a commuter, you are cyclists already. You use a lot of things that exist in that community already, like finding the right path. Because oftentimes the quickest route is not the route that you always want to take. But just to try different things, kind of like what Davey said, like just try different things out and see what kind of works. For me, it's the route that I take that I feel the safest. And it may not even be a route that has infrastructure. It could just be a route that's less trafficked, or a route where there's not necessarily as many people commuting, or a route where I know people are usually more generous. And that's one of the nice things of being on a cargo bike with kids. People give you room, where when you're on a normal cyclist, like, people do not always give you room. So people are usually much more generous, but you got to kind of find and figure out what works for you as well.
And relative to a car, it's a lot easier to swerve. You're like, oh, I thought I was going to go this way, but actually I need to get up on the sidewalk and then do a U-turn, and then you can't do that if you're stuck in traffic in a car. It's just like there's like a lot of like secret superpowers that we have around that kind of thing.
I think there's a lot of like, one thing that I never have heard anyone talk about, but I'd like to just mention, is when you are a parent and you're transporting yourself anywhere, whether it's by car or bike, sometimes you're really tired when you're doing that. So I know how to bicycle really well in San Francisco because I've been doing it a long time. But the thing that I found that I really needed to give myself in order to be safe and to get where I needed to go safely is time. So I just had to slow down and sometimes take a break or a stop for a cup of coffee or tea that I wasn't planning for, because I needed to have my senses about me. And really, I should be driving that way and I should be walking that way. But definitely, I need to be bicycling that way. And that actually was a really good wake up for me, that, hey, the best way I can be safe is by engaging really thoughtfully with my world. and that's true if you're walking down a block, you know? And so that's been really huge for me. I basically, in the first month that I was riding, I doubled the time that I gave myself everywhere I had to go. Now I'm in much better shape, and I'm much more able to do it. So my percentage is way down. But time is really important. And we don't give ourselves enough time to do a lot of things. But I've been really empowered by that. It's not a problem, it's a benefit.
It's pretty cool. I mean, in my experience too with family cycling, I mean, it's already an adventure to do this, and this just brings it to a whole new level in terms of adventure. And so you're having this incredible experience, doing a whole new thing with a whole new person. It's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you for being at Super Bicycle, everybody.
Woo-hoo!
But
Mike,
it's not over yet, so don't go anywhere.
Have some lunch. If you want to have lunch, meet me over there.